Good afternoon, everyone. I will call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Ways and Means Committee to order. I'm Abdi Warsami, and I'm the chair of the committee. And I have with me Council Member Cunningham, Johnson, Fletcher, Palmisano, and Council Vice President Jenkins. And we have a quorum of the committee and therefore can conduct the committee's business. Today on the consent item, we have 24 items for consideration. And I'll read the consent item, and they are as follows. Item number one is a claim of Marilyn Telereco. Item number two is a legal settlement of potential claims regarding Nelson Auto Center. Item number three is a legal settlement, Alex Kendall versus City of Minneapolis et al. Item number four is a gift acceptance from the University of Chicago Harris Public Policy for Travel Related Expenses to attend the Chief Financial Officer Forum. Item number five is a contract with Center for Energy and Environment for home energy squad visits and energy efficiency loans. Item number six is a Capital Long Range Improvement Committee CLIC appointments, approving the council appointments of Raya Ismaili for seat number 20, Ward 10, for the remainder of the two-year term beginning January 1st, 2017 and ending December 31st, 2018. Item number seven is the transfer of the Director of Strategic Partnership position and related one-time funding from the City Coordinator's Office to the Mayor's Office. Item number eight is a contract with Dynamic Imaging Systems, Inc. for maintenance of photo imaging equipment in the Police Juvenile Division and Police Crime Lab. Item number nine is a contract with Chinfonet Software, Inc. for providing customer letters and crew work orders for Public Works Solid Waste and Recycling Department. Item number 10 is a contract with governmentjobs.com for the applicant tracking software systems for the Human Resources HR Department. Item number 11 is a travel donation acceptance for Anna Peterson, Step Up Director. Item number 12 is the 2018 Urban Scholars Program funding from partners organizations. Item number 13 is a grant from the Minnesota Department of Human Services for tobacco compliance checks. Item number 14 is a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health for home visiting services. Item number 15 is the Jordan West and Willard South Residential Street Resurfacing Project approval and assessment. Item number 16 is a bid for 61st Street West Street Reconstruction Project. Item number 17 is a bid for removal of branches, brush, weeds, and grass growth. Item number 18 is bids for fine aggregate. Item number 19 is a bid for specialty vegetation management at stormwater treatment facilities. Item number 20 is the 5th Street Northeast and Spring Street Northeast Street Resurfacing Project approval and assessment. Item number 21 is Armitage South Area Residential Street Resurfacing Project approval and assessment. Item number 22 is Oak Park Alley Construction Project approval and assessment. Item number 23 is a project labor agreement for the Public Service Building Project. And item number 24 is a Civil Service Commission appointments. And those are the 24 consent items. I'll move all items for approval. Do any of my colleagues have questions for any of these items? And Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Warsami. I'd like to pull item number 7 for discussion.
All right, thank you very much. So Councilmember Fletcher has pulled item number 7. So removing item number 7 for discussion, we will vote on those items. Let's vote on the items the rest of the items of consent. And I move approval of all the consent items apart from item number 7. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. And those items have been approved. Yes. You had discussion as well? Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a quick moment to point out item 17. Very excited to point out that Neon Property Maintenance LLC is included, which is a North Side based business, which is a lot of small North Siders who North Side owned businesses that have come together to be able to do larger projects like this. So I'm just excited to see this included and wanted to say congratulations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And we have approved all the consent items. So now we're going to move to our discussion items. And including item number 7, we have 3 discussion items, item number 25 and 26, as well as item number 7. So let's start with item number 7 and open for discussion. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Warsame. So the item under discussion is to move a position, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, from the City Coordinator's Office to the Mayor's Office. And this is not necessarily something that I think is a terrible idea, but it is something that I take very seriously. I think that it's an important set of decisions for us to make, particularly because if we're creating a position that this council isn't able to give staff direction to, we want to make sure that we really understand the definition of the position and what it's going to be doing, and we understand it's related to housing. We have a housing commission, and we have a department in CPED that's doing housing work, and so we want to make sure that we especially understand the differences between the mission of this position and the mission of the workers already engaged in housing work throughout the enterprise. And so if there's anybody here from the Mayor's Office who is prepared to speak on this, I'd be interested in just getting a little more sort of on-record conversation about what the intention is of the position, what we're trying to accomplish, and what the parameters are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. And I do see the Mayor's Chief of Staff is here, Mr. Gia Vitale. Would you like to come up and answer some of these questions?
Thank you, Chair Warsame, Councilmember Fletcher. The position is pretty straightforward. It's an external-facing position with 2 major charges. The first being to build the resources from our private, public, and nonprofit, our nonprofit, philanthropic, and nonprofit partners across the city, the region, and also to help build a regional and jurisdictional approach to this work.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you. So we have a lot of clarity in thinking about this position, that this position is not a policy position, and is not, because I could imagine, especially in an outward-facing role, not involved in actually negotiating development deals, which is something that happens in CPED.
Correct. So this position is very much externally facing in terms of building the political capital and will and financial resources that we need. And it is not a policy position. The policy work remains within CPED.
And I understand that there's a candidate who is at least a front runner, if not someone sort of pre-selected for the role. Is this going to be publicly posted? Are we doing a search? And if so, how broad a search are we doing for the position?
So because this position does not yet live in the mayor's office and is not officially a position, we do not have a candidate selected for this position. It is an appointed position from the mayor's office. And so there are a number of folks that we expect fit the qualifications, and we will be connecting with them once we move to a place where this is actually in the mayor's office.
So this would be appointed?
I believe based on the position as it stands now. Actually, no, I may be making. That is actually not the case. I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Thank Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. The first is why the mayor's office? Because it currently lives in the coordinator's office, so why move it to the mayor's office?
Right. Chair Warsame, Council Member Cunningham. This position has been vacant in the coordinator's office for several years. You could speak to the coordinator's office for the reason as to why that's the case. And the reason to move it to the mayor's office, as you all know, this is a high priority for the mayor, affordable housing, and I think it's important to the council as well and to the city and to the region. And this is something that we think will help elevate the conversation and the work around affordable housing.
All right, thank you. And thank you for that. So the concern I think that I have is by moving this position into the mayor's office, then that position then is responsible just to the mayor in a lot of ways. We don't have staff directions. We aren't able to hold that person accountable in a lot of ways because of the fact that it would live in the mayor's office. So that's where a little bit of apprehension is where is how do we as a legislative body fit into that as well? And so I know that there hasn't been obviously an official appointment, but I know that there is someone who has been in mind, and I'm curious, will there be some intentionality around hiring folks from diverse backgrounds or bringing in nonprofit experience? Like what kind of qualifications is the mayor really looking for in bringing this role into his office?
Certainly, this role I think is because of the external facing nature of the position and the work across the city. The person will certainly need to have good relationships across the city, understanding of the philanthropic partners, the business partners that we'll be connecting with to help build the resources, and also having understanding of the regional approach that we're hoping to take, because we know that we can't do this alone as a city, that we need to work with our partners.
And my last question would be, equity wasn't mentioned in there, so I just wonder how equity fits into this position and also in the kind of candidate that you would be looking to fill this position with and that sort of equity analysis.
Sure. I think that's something that we could lean on our partners in the council to help us with and other folks across the enterprise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Rosami. Hello, Ms. Vitale. My question, the item says the transfer for a 1 year one-time funding, and so I'm curious as to how that ongoing funding for this position is going to be addressed, as it would, thinking probably come out of our general fund, which I'm just curious as to what the thoughts or plans are around that.
Great. Chair Rosami, Council Vice President Jenkins. Yes, this year it would be a transfer from the coordinator's office, and in subsequent years we'd have to go through the regular budget cycle.
And then to some of the concerns that have been already identified, what is going to be the scope of focus of this position in terms of strategic partnerships?
So as I stated earlier, it's like I said, it's going to be this external facing position and really working to build the political will amongst our regional partners and the financial backing that we need to increase affordable housing across the city. But it is solely at this point focused on affordable housing.
Yeah, my deep concern is that we have so many other challenges beyond that impact people's ability to afford housing, and that we need strategic partnerships to help address some of those concerns as well. And the point has been made that this position will be solely responsible to the mayor, and so it feels like it would somehow inhibit opportunities to create other strategic partnerships beyond those that are being created within the mayor's office.
Is that a question?
That I can put it in the form of a question.
Okay.
How will this position focused on strategic partnerships and housing impact other strategic partnerships that we need in the city, for example, around workforce development or youth violence, or many of the issues that we rely on strategic partnerships to help us address within the city?
Council Vice President, my assessment is that this position, unlike any other position in the mayor's office or across the city enterprise, I don't think it will inhibit those. I think it will strengthen those relationships. And like any conundrum we come across as colleagues, I think we will find opportunities to work together. And so I would view this as a great opportunity rather than something that's going to inhibit those relationships or be something that's competing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think back to our previous mayor and the mayor's office before that, and this seems pretty consistent to me that there are positions there that go and seek the funding, and therefore I plan on supporting this. I would offer the encouragement to make it part of your story of the success of this position, and a year from now, come back and share how much funding was captured, how successful this has been, how much return on investment there's been for this position, and hopefully it's something then that we can all reflect on and look for other opportunities as well to go out and seek that funding. But appreciate you being here to answer the questions and the thoughtfulness around this position, and hopefully whoever that candidate ends up being in this, if this is approved, that they're very successful, because it's a huge need and we need to rally as many sources and buckets of funding and partners as we can around this pressing issue.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I actually just wanted to speak to the structure of the previous administration. There wasn't actually an external facing strategic partnership position like this. I think that the mayor played a larger role in that, but we actually did not have positions like that. At this point, how large is the staff in the mayor's office?
Chair Warsame, Council Member Cunningham, there are 13 full-time employees in the mayor's office, including the mayor.
Okay. And so you had mentioned earlier about ongoing. So will this be included moving forward in the budget request? Will that be expected to be in the mayor's proposed budget?
For 2019?
Moving forward after this one-time transfer?
I presume so.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you. Would there be some significant disadvantage in terms of the mayor's ability to interact with this employee if this was housed in the coordinator's office?
Chair Warsame, Councilmember Fletcher. I think if this was in the coordinator's office, we certainly could build a relationship with that person like we do across the enterprise. The stance of the mayor's office is that this is a top priority for the mayor, affordable housing across the city. And so the reason to have it in the mayor's office is to continue to elevate the conversation and to drive and oversee the work of affordable housing across the city.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you. I'd just like to make a few comments myself. I think with the new administration and Mayor Jacob Fry is prioritizing rightfully public housing and highlighting the crisis of public housing. I think that this, to me, makes sense, and I would echo what Councilmember Andrew Johnson just said, that we do. I mean, and I'm reassured that it is not going to conflict in any way with our current staff and housing director and what CPED does. So I'm reassured by your comments. But I think we need to come out with creative ways because the status quo is not working. We do have a housing crisis. We do have an affordable housing crisis. And whatever tools and different strategies that we can use, I think we should actually try them, because we all came here championing the cause of addressing this issue and making sure that we have more affordable housing in our city. So I'll be supportive of this, and I would like my colleagues to also support this as well. So I'll make a motion. Councilmember Fletcher?
You can make your motion and then we'll discuss it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll make a motion. I'll move that we I'll move to move item number 7, to approve item number 7. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Warsami. I will vote for this today to move it forward to the full council. I think there's going to be a lively discussion at the full council as well. I think I know some of our colleagues who aren't on this committee have an interest in this and have been following this issue. I think that as described, I think the idea of having someone to go get resources does make sense. I think I'm persuaded of that. I think I also have some trepidation that I think if we can find ways to create some reassurance, I think the mayor's affordable housing task force has felt like it's operating a little bit in parallel to the housing committee, and there hasn't always been as much coordination, and I worry that this feeds that dynamic. So we're going to be watching very closely, I think, how this position operates to make sure that it really is the externally facing role that we're looking for it to be. And we would certainly not be the first organization to let development and fundraising sort of wag the dog on policy. And I'm going to be watching very closely to make sure that we're not doing that, right? I think it's very important that that housing policy continues to be set by the elected body that was sent to do it. So with that, I will vote to move it forward this today, and I think we can expect more conversation next week.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments and discussions? Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Warsami. I will be voting in support of our full council having an opportunity to weigh in on this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation. I really want to encourage the mayor to fully consider all of the issues that are impacting this affordable housing crisis. And in my opinion, it is not just the lack of housing that is at issue. It's the lack of people's abilities to afford that housing. And so we need to be thinking of creative approaches to address people's economic abilities, to address the disparities that create, the inequities in our system, such as racism and sexism, which impacts a lot of women of color and their abilities to obtain housing in our city. And so just to focus our attention on raising money to build more housing, in my opinion, is short-sighted.
Thank you very much, Council Vice President Jenkins. Any other discussions on this item? All those in approval say aye. Aye. Those in a disagreement say nay. The item passes. So thank you very much. Thank you to the city, to the mayor's chief of staff as well for being here. Now we're going to go to our real discussion items number 25 and 26. Number 25 is issuing debt at the city and ratings agency's role in bond sales. And item number 26 is debt for capital expenditure charter amendment. So we're going to start with item number 25, and we have our CFO, Mr. Mark Ruff. So welcome, Mark.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Mark Ruff, the city's chief financial officer. We have a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully we'll get it up on the screen. I just want you to know the city takes password security very seriously, and we now have a Pentagon level password here in our display, of which I tried 3 times and failed. So I'm getting some expertise here to help us along the way. This is nothing that is an action item for the council and the committee at this time. I think it follows in the theme of Chair Warsami's thoughts that we spend some time at this committee on some just educational items. So we did fail. It makes me feel better, actually, that you were not able to get in there. So we can put it up on the screen, I think, if we need to. Is that it, right, Irene, if we want to? So sometimes we get hung up on language. The and so we have a bond issue that the city issues. And what that really is nothing more than the city taking out a loan. And so we take out loans for a variety of projects. We also borrow money for the park board. So they set their own budget, but we actually, by charter, are the issuer of their debt. We also, in our charter, have certain procedures and limitations, and one of the things that's on the agenda is this $15 million limit that's been in the charter. When we talk about this term general obligation bond, or GO bond, sometimes it's referred to, it is traditional across the country that if you want to get the lowest possible interest rate, for example, when we issue debt for our water utility, it's not just the water revenues that back up the revenue or back up the payment of that, but we actually add another level of security for the benefit of the bondholders of saying if there's not enough water revenues, then the city will levy taxes to make the debt payment. So a general obligation it refers to the fact that it is generally an obligation of the city to make these payments no matter what. So essentially the city has to go bankrupt before we would not make payments, which is very unlikely for the city of Minneapolis. Our bond sales, unlike other parts of the country, are a competitive sale because we have pretty simple bond issues, because the payment streams are well known, because we do this often. We're able to attract bidders, not just locally, but nationally. And so that is a process that we follow. It is a procurement process, but it's done a little differently than advertising on a regular website. There's a specific methodology that most cities and counties use across the nation. We also have a document, and I included this in your packet. That's an important document because it's called an official statement or an offering document that actually explains as much as possible in plain language what are the benefits of investing in the city of Minneapolis, essentially, because people who buy our bonds, who essentially take on some of our debt, are investing in us. And so if you look through the back half, especially the Appendix A of that document, it talks about trends, valuation trends, employment trends. It talks about how diverse our taxpayers are. Talks about the different types of debt that we have. And later on this summer, I'll have Mike Gablin, who is our debt manager, go through that particular document in more detail. For today is not necessary, but we will have the opportunity for this committee to understand where is all of our debt and where is it being paid from. So that document is important not just for the investors, but because it's a securities offering, it also has Securities and Exchange Commission oversight. Now, that doesn't usually affect us as long as we don't default on our bonds, but there are cities around the country who have defaulted on bonds. And when there's a default, the SEC comes in and says, was there anything misleading in that document that would tell an investor that not necessarily the whole story? And so we take those documents very seriously. Thank you, Casey. When we talk about bond issues, it's usually not just project by project we issue bonds. We put a whole number of projects together into one bond issue. In this particular case, this spring, we're actually issuing 2 bonds. Okay. When we have a larger issue, it attracts more and more investors, more potential bids, and should then lead to lower interest rates. We also, when we undertake a bond issue, it's not like a home mortgage or a car mortgage or car loan. It doesn't have to be the same amount of payments every year. We can adjust those payments however we want to. We can have them as short or as long as we want to as well. We also do try to seek lower interest rates on some of our debt. That terminology is called refundings, or sometimes referred to as refinancings, but same thing, which is just the purpose is to lower interest rates over a period of time. Then we actually also issue taxable debt as well as tax exempt. And that terminology is tax exempt means whoever buys our bonds that are tax exempt means that the interest that they earn on that investment is not subject to state and federal income taxes. And so that's why we're partly the reason we're getting a lower interest rate. There was discussion in the federal tax reform about actually eliminating that tax exemption because the federal government feels like it costs them money. And a number of local and state government organizations pushed hard against that. And so that exemption was not taken away, but it was actually lessened because tax rates went down. And so the benefit of some of those tax exempt bonds went down as well. Most of the time, their taxable bonds are issued when, for example, the Target Center, there's a private use or a private activity associated with it. Here's a list of the kinds of projects that are in the current bond issue. And so you can see they're pretty standard basic projects. There's street reconstructions, there's some bridges, there's some alley work. We also have some parkways, traffic signals. There's also some enterprise debt as well, meaning the sewer and water projects. So this particular bond issue, this issuance in the spring of 2018 is about $40 million. And so that's the types of projects, that's what's listed in that official statement. As a part of a bond issue, as I said, we expect to issue about twice a year. We do one in the spring and one in the fall. We do go out and essentially get a credit report, or in the parlance of municipal debt issues, municipal bond issues, is a bond rating. The rating agencies use a specific scoring mechanism. The highest rating for the firms that we use is AAA, so 3 A's in a row. And then the next highest level is AA+. So from Standard & Poor's, we have a AAA rating. From Fitch, we have AA+. The state of Minnesota's bond rating is, I don't think it was upgraded yet. Last time I checked, it was actually Standard & Poor's was a AA+, and the federal government has a AA+ rating from Standard & Poor's. So the city actually has a higher rating than the federal government at this point in time. Okay. Ratings are expensive. We spend over $100,000 per bond issue to get a rating. We used to have 3, so we actually brought it down to 2 a few years ago just because it was expensive, and we don't see that much benefit from those 3. And the firms use very different methodologies. Our rating was changed last year by Fitch, and it was over pension concerns. It had nothing to do with the operation of the city. It was generally over the fact that we had a significant increase in pensions. And so there is a pension bill at the legislature that you may have heard about, which does involve some of the city employees. And so I thought I'd take a few minutes just to review that with you as well. So for pensions for public employees, and I'm just going to speak generally, the city makes a contribution on behalf of the employee, and then the employee themselves puts money into the pension system. Okay? Our city employees are all a part of PERA, P-E-R-A. It's a short acronym for that. And they're in 2 different buckets. One is a GER for general employees, and then the other is police and fire. So here you can see what are the annual contributions that the city makes to PERA. And it's a substantial amount of money. It is $58 million for 2017. It's on a different calendar year than our fiscal year because of the state calendar year. There are two significant amounts in each of those buckets. One is current employees, and then the other is related to the closed pension funds that we refer to. That was the subject of a great deal of lawsuits and legislation about 9 years ago when the city's local pension funds were merged into PERA. And we have additional payments that we're making until 2031 for those pension essentially deficits that existed at the time of the merger. So those are both a part of the city's budget. The current employees part of it is not a separate line item on the levy. It is just part of our general employee essentially benefit costs. But the other 2 are separate levies that you will see on the levy certifications and the levy proposals that come forward with the budget. At the current time, PERA, and now that we're fully merged with these closed pension funds, does not have a fully funded pension system. So what does that mean? It means that, just think of it, the best maybe analogy I can come up with is if I am saving for retirement and my projections show that essentially I will run out of money before I die. Okay, so I have not fully funded my retirement. The same with pension systems is that there is a measurement. They do projections on the amount of benefits that they're going to pay out over a period of time, and they have an assumption on what investment rate they're going to earn over a period of time, and with PERA at 7.5% investment rate. And so if our benefit payments go longer than the fund of money at a 7.5% interest rate, then that's termed generally to be not fully funded. Okay, so PARA does have projections, which by 2036, they will be 100% funded, but right now they are not fully funded. So they have what they call pension liabilities. Okay, so PARA assigns pension liabilities then to each contributing jurisdiction, and that goes into our financial statements, all right, our audit, basically. And this chart shows part of the reason that the rating agencies were noticing here is from 2015 to 2016, for especially our police and fire, that's PEPFF, our pension liabilities more than doubled. So you can see why they'd get a little interested and say, if your financial statements say that all of a sudden you owe twice, it's like having a bond, twice as much debt. That's the way they treat it. All of a sudden you have twice as much debt as you previously have. And their concern was that this was actually going to continue to increase. Okay, now what you can see happened in 2017, subsequent to that rating, is actually went back down again. Again, why is that? The real reason is Paris' financial situation hasn't changed. It's just that there are some new accounting rules that say you have to vary your investment rate depending on how close you are to full funding. And because PARA was not as close to full funding in 2016, they lowered their investment rate from 7.5% down to less than 6% on the police and fire. And that was enough to actually cause that significant increase in liabilities. Because we had a pretty good year, we being generally the equities market stocks, which is what the PARA through the State Board of Investment primarily invests in, 2017, we were able again to use the 7.5% on a projection basis. So nothing material changed for the city. Our obligations didn't change, but our liabilities, as in our financial statements, went up significantly. So we've been spending time with PARA. We're going to do some restatements of some assumptions here in our particular audit for 2017 that will more generally and specifically outline what are our liabilities and how are they attached. I'm going to use TRA, which is the number on the far right, as an example. So I haven't mentioned TRA. TRA is actually teachers' retirement pension. So we say, why is the city of Minneapolis even involved in liabilities for teachers' retirement? And it has to do with some legislation that was passed more than 10 years ago as essentially a contribution towards teachers' retirement. The city was, along with the Minneapolis School District, asked to additionally levy $2.25 million. So when you look at our levy form, you have seen for a number of years and will continue to see a $2.25 million. I think we levied $2.3 million just to account for some potential unpaid taxes. But that $2.25 million is going to go to the teachers' retirement fund. I don't know the whole backstory as to why exactly the city of Minneapolis was asked to levy on behalf of the school district, but it's been around for a while, and it was the legislature who directly put that in. All right. So if you look at that column and you say our liability went from $36 million up to $137 million. How do we have more liability if we have a fixed payment in statute? And it was one of the questions we raised, and it has to do with some of these accounting rules, which ascribe liability on the basis of contribution. And they assume that if the TRA is in worse financial shape, then our payments are going to go up, which is not the case. So that's part of the reason we're going to be restating our financials, is to make sure a more accurate portrayal of what our liabilities are longer term. We've communicated all this with the rating agencies. I don't know if there's going to be any change going forward, but I can tell you that you may hear about people concerned about pensions. There is, as I said, a pension bill at the legislature.
Mr. Ruff, I have a question from Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Warsame. Mr. Ruff, and so when we levy on behalf of the school board, does those funds go directly to the school, or
they go directly to the pension fund, which is the teachers' retirement fund? Okay. Yeah, does not go to the school district.
Well, to the teachers' retirement fund.
Yeah.
So, the city levies for that on behalf. Is there any recompense to the city for that, or the funds go strictly to that pension fund?
Chair Sami, Council Vice President Jenkins, I will endeavor to find the story behind all of this. My suspicion is somebody at the legislature said it's the same taxpayers, and it maybe is easier for everyone to accept this legislation if it doesn't show up so much on the school district side and more on the city side. That my guess is that's the suspicion, but I don't have the full story on that. It is an obligation, believe it or not, that continues until the teachers' retirement fund is fully funded for their pensions, which could be, several decades. I mean, we just don't know what the situation is going to be for the pension funds. But it is treated as an other taxing district, so it doesn't show up under our actual city. When you pay your property taxes, it doesn't show up under the city line item. It shows up as an other taxing district, but it is in our levy. I will endeavor. This is, relatively speaking, I think one of those mysteries that's in the city at this point in time. The last thing I just wanted to talk about, if I answered your question, Council Vice President.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, one more question from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Sami. Thank you, Mr. Ruff. So one of the things I've been curious about is it seems a little odd to me that Fitch is singling out pensions as the thing that prompted the ratings downgrade. We've taken on liabilities in a variety of ways, including a stadium bond and any number of things that they don't necessarily view. Is there an ideological component to Fitch focusing on pensions? I mean, do we have a sense of I mean, I know in personal credit ratings, often it seems like the things that they punish you for are actually sometimes even smart behaviors, but they aren't, the behaviors that banks like. Does Fitch look particularly badly on pension obligations compared to other obligations?
Chair Warsami, Councilmember Fletcher, you ask a good question. Every rating agency, so Standard & Poor's has a rating criteria. If you look through their rating report, which I copied, there's about 7 of them. They weight them differently. So Standard & Poor's only weights debt and pensions 10% of your rating. Fitch has a higher assignment of that. That's just their own decision as to what is a risk area. Remembering that credit reports and ratings are not they're not really a comment on the quality of life in a city, right? They are comment on what they think the likelihood is that you would default. And Fitch has new criteria, and GASB 68, which is the accounting standards that is involved here, is a brand new accounting standard as well. And so I think we got caught in a bad place of them seeing this increasing on the heels of Detroit and other lawsuits and bond defaults, and saying, boy, remembering that ratings are a bell curve, so it does. So Minnesota looks a lot worse than the rest of the country, and we better find out why. And we're going to essentially downgrade you until we find out why. So I was frankly surprised by it, because it's usually what rating agencies will do is put you on a negative watch, meaning that, oh, we're concerned about this, but we're going to, while we learn about more and more about this, we're going to take some action. That's as much as I can ascribe to it, is just their knee-jerk reaction saying you're out of whack with our whole new rating system. And so because we now have a scoring system where we have to abide by it more rather than giving you the benefit of the doubt, we have to live with our scoring system, and you look out of whack, and so you're going to be downgraded. We've been working hard on communications with them to explain just this next topic of how we're going to fix these problems statewide. And I would also say that we are also caught in a time where there's an over-emphasis on pensions, because another part of employment benefits, post-employment benefits, is healthcare. And there will be new accounting standards that will come out in a couple of years. The city of Minneapolis actually looks very good on healthcare nationally, because we do not pay any part of our retirees' healthcare premiums, whereas in other parts of the state and other parts of the country, there's significant amount of exposure and liability for healthcare costs on the part of public employers. All we do is by state law, we have to allow people to stay on our plans and still pay premiums, but we don't subsidize their premiums. So I think in a couple of years, you will see, again, another change in the view of large cities. But did we get caught in a bad place? I think so. Is there more to it than that? I don't think so.
Go ahead.
So last thing, I just want to heads up, and again, this is ratings, but it's also a little forecasting on the pension bill, which is the police and fire is in a more difficult place statewide than the general para funds. And so there is, as a part of the pension solution at the state for not just state funds, not just for TRA, but for para, an increase of employer and employee contributions, and then some additional state funding. And so that if that passes, it will mean that for 2019, the city will have an additional $3 million of contributions per year for police and fire. We also have some of that closed pension fund legislation is a trigger that if they change the expectation lower on investment rates, we have to put in more money for the closed pension funds. That could be as much as $1.5 million per year through 2031. And then in addition, IGR staff, I think, has made council members aware that last year there was a projection that some of our state aids for pension will also go down starting in 2019. I know our RGR staff will be working hard to push that out just as they were able to 2 years ago, but that could be a significant reduction as well. And so I just generally raise this in the context of bond issues in the sense of there is the perceived, concern over the city. And then what I would say is more of the real financial impacts of pensions, and the real financial impacts are just what I described, which is the state's going to say the city has to put in some more, either because we want to put in less or because we actually do need to put more funding in to make sure that our pension systems are healthy long term. So that's a quick overview of those topics. We will have more of them, but I just want to introduce those to the council because I think they are certainly significant. The last thing I will say is this week we expect new rating reports. I will send those out to the council as a whole, so you'll be able to read those. I invite you to share them with your constituents. They are good, pithy summaries, sometimes a little dense, but they do have awfully good metrics in there and talks about not just the difficulties in the city, but generally, if you read those rating reports, it says a whole ton of good things about the city of Minneapolis. And I think you should all be proud of that. One of the things that they talk about is the solid management of the city, and management is more on you as elected officials than it is even on me. And so I include all of us in that conversation. So thanks for the time to chat with you about this, Mr. Chair.
Much. Any questions or queries? Thank you very much, Mark. And I make a motion to receive and file this informative report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. And that has moved. So we have the final discussion item, which is item number 26, debt for capital expenditure charter amendment. Transmitted to the Charter Commission a proposed amendment to Article 9, Section 9.4 of the City Charter relating to finance, debt increasing limits on borrowing for capital expenditure, and permit the combination of charter and state borrowing authority. And Mark's going to do this? All right, Mark. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think Chair Warsame read a short explanation at the last council meeting of this particular change. This $15 million limit per project has been around since 1973, as I understand it. There's been no inflation. As Chair Warsame discussed, this has really never stopped the city from moving forward with the project, but it is, as costs are going up, making it increasingly difficult and a longer process for us to find statutory authority outside of our charter to undertake bond issues. And I use the example of fire station quickly is going to be more than $15 million. And so we have to go find a different statute to go through and approve that. Other times the city has received special legislation. That legislation may only require a simple majority of the council. And I think the charter provision provides an awful lot of transparency because you have a supermajority requirement of the council as well as the Board of Estimate and Taxation approval necessary. And I also think people would say, well, why are we doing this now and hasn't it been dealt with in the past? I think not only are costs going up, but I see as you as a council and the mayor bringing forth some proposals that may revolve around renewable energy, may revolve around some more investments of affordable housing. And I think we as staff feel like it's incumbent on us to bring you more options to use debt, if you so choose in the future, to undertake some of those endeavors. The inflation that we're proposing is both going backwards. So we would take 1973 at $15 million and increase it at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So today that would be right around $80 million. And then also going forwards. I will say that I started 2 years ago. My staff brought this forward to me 2 years ago and said, we should really do something about this because it makes it more difficult, or we have to go through some hoops. For example, when we did a parking ramp recently, we had to specially assess the neighboring property to do the parking ramp just because it was more than $15 million. And so the neighboring property is looking at us like, why are you doing this? And you're not really charging us, but you're assessing us, and there's going to be a rebate. And I think it, to some extent, erodes some public trust as well when we have our own limit that doesn't really apply to anything that we're always getting around. And so that's part of the reason for now. And I think the last thing I will say is I did work with a number of cities as a consultant around the state who are also charter cities, and I'm not aware that they have these similar very low limits. I know, for example, the city of St. Louis Park, with the supermajority of their council, can borrow all the way up to their debt limit. So they don't even have a cap at all. It could be, $100, $200 million on the smaller city like the city of St. Louis Park. So I would just say that this just gives you more tools and also gives the public a more transparent process as well.
Any discussion on that item? Okay, I make a motion to refer that item to council. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. All right, and that item has passed. And having committee's business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.